the scent of potpourri, the films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including my written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of all of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. I'm hoping this weekend I'll have some new content on Patreon, because I'm going to be doing, I'm hoping at least that tomorrow I might do a fabled weeknight double feature at the theater after work. So we'll see how that goes. But if I do, I'll post immediate reactions on Patreon. Once again, you can sign up on Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, which includes Letterboxd at obsessiveviewer. And later in the show, we'll be talking about a bevy of samurai films, but before that, we're going to go over some movie news and then review FX's Shogun in a non-spoiler and spoiler feature review. And joining me this week as my second on this seppuku of a podcast is returning guest and co-host of the Odd Trilogies Podcast, my friend and IFJA colleague, Andy Carr. How's it going, Andy?
It's going great. I'm happy to be here and happy to be your second.
Nice. You know, I would not want it any other way. If my head needs to be chopped off, I want it to be done by none other than Andy Carr. It's an OT-OV crossover.
Yeah, what an honor.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So how you been, man? How's life? How's life, and how are you dealing with those obsessive viewer guest appearance fees?
Oh yeah. Things are going well. Podcast related financial woes aside. No, things are great. This year has just been kind of one big slalom of me exposing myself to more Japanese movies.
Nice.
So I'm excited to talk about Shogun and some other films in that realm as well.
Same here. It's no secret. It's one of my favorite genres of film, and I was very excited about Shogun. So I'm very excited to have you on, especially after you've, as they say, now that you've done the work.
Now that I'm worthy,
exactly,
to be in conversation with you.
Yes, you're a vassal in my in my clan. But before we get into all of that and everything, I do want to just highlight Odd Trilogies. Of course, anyone listening to this knows that your podcast, Odd Trilogies, is a great podcast where you guys discuss trios of movies, whether sequels or thematically themed ones. What have you done recently on Odd Trilogies, and how have you not just packed it all up after suffering through God's Not Dead?
Oh man, yeah. That is our most recent episode, God's Not Dead, or the sequels to God's Not Dead, because what more could be said about the original?
Right.
We focused on the sequels. That was a bit of a trial. Our original idea was to get together with our guest and friend Jake Atwood and watch all 4 films in one go.
God.
We didn't end up being able to do that due to scheduling issues, but we broke it up into 2, and that was tough enough to do 2 double features. So I'm kind of glad in retrospect we didn't try and sit through all that at once.
Oh God.
But we had a good discussion on it, and all 3 of us, Logan and Jake and I, have family background in Christianity, and so that was kind of a fun perspective to look at it from, and all that. And and up next we've got our prequel episode on Zack Snyder's latest opus, Rebel Moon.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Which you appeared on Obsessive Viewer for the review of Rebel Moon Part 1.
That's right. That's right.
I had honestly toyed with the idea of reviewing, and I talked about this in a previous episode, reviewing Rebel Moon Part 2, and I was going to reach out to you and see if you wanted to review it with me, but when the closer it came to the release of it, I was like, I really don't know if I can just allocate the 2.5, however long this one is, amount of time to watch it, because the first one left such a sour taste in my mouth.
Really, I mean, from my recollection of our conversation on it, like, for you, it felt like the worst version of your favorite movie
exactly
you've ever seen, and Part 2 does not deviate at all. Like, it's exactly, it's the end of Seven Samurai, but worse.
Jesus.
It's Seven Samurai if you didn't care about any of the characters, if it was terribly shot, if it set up a sequel that nobody asked for.
That's the thing that keeps, like, that kind of doesn't blow my mind or anything, but I'm just like, I've heard that it's not end. It doesn't end. It's open ended, and I'm just like, the balls on this guy, and like,
I mean, the first. I guess it's weird because like it does close off like the kind of more immediate conflict set up by the first film, which is kind of that Seven Samurai plot of like, oh, our village is in danger. Yeah. But the whole first film spends so much of its time like building on the the political conflict and the greater cosmic war that's happening, that it's like, from the first movie that like the village plot is not like the A plot. So then it's weird that the second movie is all village, does nothing to advance the greater plot that was set forth in the first one, and just kind of leaves you on a cliffhanger of like, okay, now the real story begins. And it's like, what? 4 or 5 hours in and we're not to the real story yet?
Yeah, that's frustrating. In my head, and this is such a dumb joke, but in my head, like, having not seen it, so I can't speak to the quality of the movie or anything, but just the idea of him leaving it open-ended or whatever, in my own personal, like, headcanon, having not seen the movie, I'm just imagining, like, a post-credit scene where he decides that he wants to further shit on Kurosawa's legacy, and like just have like someone off screen, like have like whoever the main character is. That's the thing, I also don't remember hardly anything about the first movie, but have like whoever's left, whoever the main character is, have her like in like on screen, and then someone like off screen, or someone saying like, yeah, we need to enlist help for these two like warring space clans in this village, and then like they just look off screen and they're like, yo, Jimbo, how about we need you over here.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that robot character played by Anthony Hopkins named Jimmy, and like I kind of at some point expected them to be like, oh, his actual like,
oh god damn, I forgot,
code name was Yojimbo, like, shortened to Jim.
Jesus. I remember I saw like a random TikTok or whatever that was like that, like it said like, yeah, Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, like, I can tell that he really likes Seven Samurai, but I don't know if he's ever watched it. Like,
loves the aesthetic. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, God damn, that's good.
Yeah, I think our friend and IFJ colleague Evan Dossie said that it's like basically just another example of him riffing something he loves without remotely understanding it. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of how it goes.
That's pretty spot on. But other like actually good things, we've got to kind of circle back to Odd Trilogies. You've been doing a lot more frequels, I think, recently.
Well, this spring has been really heavy on the frequels, and that wasn't like by design. We weren't like trying to pump out prequels or anything, but we were looking at the release calendar, and it was like, oh, all these movies are coming out that are like, you know, supplemental to an episode we've done before. So it ended up being almost 3 prequels in a row.
Nice.
And I think that's all the prequels we're doing for this year.
That's awesome. So you've got Kung Fu Panda 4, Godzilla X Kong, and you also, I haven't listened to this yet, but it's like next on my queue to listen to, but you did, and I don't remember if I told you about that. We talked about this last time you were on, but Denis Villeneuve's sci-fi adaptations. I'm very excited for that one, because that's, oh my God, that guy's a freaking genius.
Yeah, and that was an episode, like a trilogy idea that we'd wanted to do for a long time. I mean, we've ever since, or I guess since the podcast's inception, we've had this master list of like, what's every idea we could do, and many of them are things we want to do. Many of things are things we don't want to do, but could do if we run out of ideas. Mostly that. But one that was at the top of the list from the beginning was like, because I think by the time the podcast started, Denis Dune was already like green lit. So that trilogy was at the top of the list. So it was fun to finally get to deliver on that.
Sweet. Yeah. And also the final thing about this, and then we can get into the episode, but God's Not Dead, just an interesting anecdote about that is that it is one of the only times, God's Not Dead, when it originally came out in 2014, I believe, that first movie, like, to put it into context, it was when, and no, I think it was 2013. It was 2013, because I think it predated the podcast, but at the time, I was, in my mid-20s, and like had just recently, like within like the past like few years at that point, had like read a bit more about like religion and secular humanism, and like it was basically like, baby's first atheism experience. And so Tiny and I, we went to the theater and saw God's Not Dead, and like because I was all like, oh, I'm so deprogrammed from religion, and I'm so angry about this propaganda movie. I wrote like a scathing piece on obsessiveviewer.com, and then I shared it on Reddit, and like it blew up. Like, cause
wow.
The actual headline was like, and this is such a what's the word I'm looking for? Very provocative, like baity title. Let me see if it's actually in 2013. But it was something like God's Not Dead, the most offensive movie I've ever seen.
Yes.
Yeah, so
the thrills of young atheism. Yep.
Where, you know, my opinion on things is more important than anything else in the world.
Well, to be fair, it does deserve a scathing review.
Yes, exactly. Oh, the movie's terrible. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like, I stand by that for sure. But anyway, that's an interesting anecdote there. Yeah. So, before we get into the actual review, we're going to go ahead. We're going to be reviewing Shogun, which is on Hulu. It's a FX on Hulu thing. It just completed its run on April 23rd. I do want to highlight an upcoming, let me make sure that the date hasn't passed. Okay. Yes. An upcoming, filmmaker mixer thing here in Indianapolis at Heartland. So they're on May 9th, 2024, obviously, from 5 to 8 p.m. at the Heartland Film headquarters at the Basel Event Center. There is an Indiana Filmmakers Mixer. I'm just going to read really quickly from this. Heartland Film is pleased to invite you to an Indiana Filmmakers Mixer. The Mixer will take place. I already said all of this. The Mixer is a great opportunity to connect with local filmmakers and Heartland Film staff, whether you're a new filmmaker trying to expand your network or a seasoned vet eager to share your next project. We hope you'll join us for an exciting night of mingling, drinks, and discussion. Simply a film fan? You're also welcome. There will be a keynote keynote presentation by special guest and award-winning Heartland Film alumnus Rocky Walls, who is the co-founder of 12 Stars Media, and he's the executive director of the very niche streaming service Whodocs, which is focused on Hoosier documentaries. And he also has an upcoming feature film, narrative film called Dirty Laundry, which I'll have links to all that in the show notes and everything. The admission to the event is free, and each guest will receive complimentary popcorn and a drink ticket, good for beer, wine, or a canned cocktail for 21 and over with ID or a soda. So anyway, again, that's on May 9th. 5 to 8 p.m. Link in the show notes. I don't know if I'm going to make it to it, honestly, but I think it would be pretty fun to go to that and check it out.
Sounds really cool.
Yeah. So, Andy, will you be there? Putting you on the spot.
Into my schedule.
Okay,
I will
well,
pencil
put
it
in your calendar right now. I'll actually get you the ticket right now.
It actually sounds pretty cool.
It does, yeah. I'm actually like I honestly don't know if I have any other scheduled stuff that night, but I'm very interested in it. So anyway, link in the show notes. Andy, do you want to go ahead and go into our feature review of the night, which is of Shogun, the miniseries?
Let's do it.
All right, sweet. So like we always do, we're going to do a non-spoiler and spoiler review for this miniseries. It's a 10-episode limited series on Hulu/FX. Like I said, it aired February 27th to April 23rd, and the premise, according to IMDb, is when a mysterious European ship is found marooned in a nearby fishing village, Lord Yoshi Toranaga discovers secrets that could tip the scales of power and devastate his enemies. Showrunners for this miniseries were Rachel Kondo and Justin Marks, and it's based on the novel Shogun by James Clavell, which was previously adapted in a 1980 miniseries that starred Toshiro Mifune. The cast for this iteration of it includes Hiroyuki Sanada, Cosmo Jarvis, Anna Sawai, Tadanobu Asano, Takahiro Hira, Tommy Bastow, and Fumi Nikado. So, Andy, let's talk Shogun. In non-spoiler thoughts, like what was your anticipation and excitement for it, and how'd you feel about it in non-spoilers?
Yeah, so I was very intrigued by it just from the trailers. I have not seen the original. I've not read the book. In fact, I'm not even, or at least at the time that the trailers came out, I was not even particularly well versed on, cinema about feudal Japan or anything like that. I just always thought feudal Japan was an interesting historical subject. I love it aesthetically. I was a young boy once who liked pretending I was a ninja and samurai and swinging katanas. I loved Ghost of Tsushima.
Nice. Same.
Great,
oh my god, so good.
Game. So I was definitely interested in it. I also think Hiroyuki Sanada is a badass. And yeah, so I was very interested. And then I had kind of made myself I'd kind of assigned myself a goal this year of like just consuming more Japanese cinema, not specifically samurai movies, but just, exposing myself more to that culture of film. And so when I realized Shogun was coming out in February, I was like, oh, I could like watch a bunch of other, classic samurai movies and Jidaigeki and stuff and kind of tie that in with Shogun, and I did. And Shogun was a really fun experience. I think I almost think I would have liked it better as a binge, which feels weird to say because like I'm kind of tired of the binge, and I kind of like that we've gone back to weekly. But I felt like I want to say I really enjoyed the show. I had a blast with it. The ending absolutely sealed it as like great for me. But there was a point in the middle, like episodes like 4 through 6 or something, where I was kind of like, are we spinning wheels a little bit?
Yeah.
But altogether, it's gorgeous. It's chock full of great performances, and I loved the element of it that's like, I loved how, obviously one of the main characters we're following is an Englishman who does not speak Japanese, and a huge dynamic at play is that he has this translator, Mariko, played by Anna Sawai, and she's not always the most transparent translator.
Right.
She alters the conversations based on her whims or her needs or what she thinks is going to be better for the situation tactically. And so that was a really cool aspect of the show that I was not quite expecting. And it makes for some really cool drama that I enjoyed.
Nice.
So yeah, altogether, it was a blast. I really enjoyed it.
Nice. I'm same as you. I haven't read the book, and I never saw the 1980s miniseries. So I was pretty blind going into it. And it's so funny you say that about binging it, because or like the idea of liking going back week to week, because I did not keep up with it week to week. Like, I had this whole thing where I was like when it aired, I was like, I should do Patreon recordings for each episode, because this is definitely in my wheelhouse. It's definitely good stuff. I'm going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
And then I just dragged my feet with the first episode and or the first two episodes when they aired on February 27th. Basically, when I do Patreon stuff, I want to do like I watch one episode, record that episode, and then watch the next episode. Yeah. And so I kept spinning my wheels watching the first episode. I watched it a few times, and I was like, I'll sit down and record. And then I was like, well, I'm really tired, and I probably should, go to sleep instead. So I eventually just I just abandoned that idea. So there's no Patreon reviews for it, hence this full length episode review. But
yeah.
I also just dragged behind, and I ended up binging like the whole show in the last 3 days, I think.
Was it a good
preparations binge? It was pretty good. Yeah, to be fully transparent, I finished the finale about an hour ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. There are some things here and there that I'm going to have to work out my feelings, especially in the spoiler section, because there are some things about it that I don't think necessarily gelled with me in terms of what I want out of this type of story. And I don't know how fair that is, given that it's, source material, it's an existing thing. And maybe I just went into it wanting something else or hoping for something else. But overall, I enjoyed it. I thought that the performances were great. Like you said, visually just gorgeous. One of the things that really, really stood out to me in a very positive way was, and I don't necessarily have like the way to articulate exactly how great this is, because I don't know the ins and outs of it, but the makeup, hairstyling, the wardrobe, everything looked so pristine and like very appropriate to that era. And
yeah, and incredibly detailed too.
Incredibly detailed. Like there's I can't remember who this was in reference to, but I remember there being like a tweet or something that went viral that was like, I don't know if it was Sydney Sweeney or it was some actress. It's like, I don't think I buy this actress in a period piece because she just looks like she knows what an iPhone is. And like, I got none of that in Shogun.
Everything looks incredibly not that I have the historical perspective to say if it's authentic, but it feels every bit of it incredibly authentic.
Oh, absolutely.
And transportive.
Yes. And as someone who kind of came of age as a film lover on this type of era depicted in film, and especially in Kurosawa movies, I don't know, there was just something really nice about seeing like a modern production going to such such big lengths to do a sprawling, like massive thing, and being so appropriate to the era that they're depicting in terms of the way it looks. Because like there were no blemishes that I could detect.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like, I mean, obviously being in the West, we wouldn't see as much of it, but it doesn't seem like there's nearly as much like really high production value, historical, like period pieces set in Japan as there were in Kurosawa's day.
Yep.
So this feels very unique for the time, especially like on streaming and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also that also does kind of go into some of the things that I wanted out of this that I didn't ultimately get because it was expectations. It was more just like wishes for, which I'll talk more about that in spoilers because that's a little bit spoilery. But
I think I have some of that too, so we'll probably relate on that.
Nice. But the thing that I really appreciate about it is the way that it is like there is a dubbed version on Hulu, but I watched the Japanese language one, the subtitled one. And I had I listened to several episodes of the companion podcast that they put out every week with Emily Yoshida. One of the writers hosts it, but they were talking in the first episode about the way that they translated the way that they wrote the script. Basically, it's incredible. Like they had a writer's room of all English speakers, and they wrote it and then sent it to Japan to be translated, and then sent it to a Japanese playwright who is specifically like a scholar of this era to further translate it.
Era accurate speech.
Yeah. And the way that they talked about it's like the translation goes through like 9 different steps before it's even like the finished product. And I'm like, that is commitment. That's awesome. So yeah. So if you're expecting John Blackthorne to say like, hey bruh, you're capping me on this. I love Blackthorne's just the way he speaks and the way Cosmo Jarvis, the Portuguese, yes,
like it's just
I
you milk dribbling.
Yes, I got into such a thing where like in my head, because I just live alone, I'm just like in my head and like in the shower I'll just randomly say like the Japans,
the Japans,
the Japans.
The way, just the way he says everything is so good. And I don't really know Cosmo Jarvis outside of this. So when I watched interviews after having seen the show, his voice is so like soft and light and like almost kind of dopey in a way. Like, I mean, he seems like a smart dude, but like just the way he talks is much more innocent than Blackthorne.
Yeah. From what I've heard, I agree. I will say, I feel like I feel like Blackthorne as a character, I'm a little bit conflicted with his arc in the show and how I feel about it, because it's presented as like a fish out of water narrative, which it is, but it's also like, it's like the thing that I appreciate about it is that it is kind of eschewing the whole white savior trope. I don't know how much it's deviating from the source material. I don't know how the source material handled that character, but this seems like a very concentrated subversion of what you would expect from this type of story. So like, because of that, he's not very prominent in the show. He's not someone who's just going to come along and just like, oh, I can now speak Japanese. But there's a run of like several episodes kind of in the middle where I feel like he's just kind of, I'm a little conflicted because I was expecting him to be like the main figure point of the show, and like what he is more strictly like the audience vessel for everything going on, which is good. We need that, but it also felt like if he wasn't going to be the focal point, then I wanted more of like Hiroyuki Sanada. I wanted him to be more figured, centralized to it. But then I don't know. It just seemed a little bit.
Yeah.
Conflicting for me. How'd you feel about it?
Yeah, I think I felt similarly, especially around the midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the marketing, I felt like really leaned on Hiroyuki Sanada.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, this is a show about him being the greatest military genius or political genius in fictional Japanese history.
Yeah.
And, you know, it felt like a lot of the marketing was also kind of like hyping up the fact that this was Hiroyuki in a major leading role,
Mm-hmm.
especially in like a Western production. And he produced the show, I think. So I was expecting like full focus on him with like Blackthorn being kind of a secondary character and Mariko, the translator, being kind of a secondary character. And it ended up being a little bit more of like a three-hander.
Yeah.
But with kind of undefined ebbs and flows of focus on each one.
Yeah.
Which did throw me off for a while, because the first like episode or two are heavily focused on Blackthorn.
Mm-hmm.
And then the middle section is a lot more, I mean, obviously Blackthorn's there. They're all three present throughout all of it, but then it focuses more on Mariko and her arc and her journey. And then the ending kind of focuses more on Toranaga, which
Mm-hmm.
is Hiroyuki Sawano's character, or
Yeah.
Sanada's character.
Yeah.
And yeah, in those like middle 3 or 4 episodes, it kind of feels like Blackthorn just becomes a gag.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've seen a lot of the memes of just like, you know, Blackthorn going to Toranaga and like complaining really emphatically about like how he needs his shit back and stuff. And then it's just Mariko translating like,
Mm-hmm.
the Anjin is displeased.
Yes.
And like that's just kind of the cycle of like episodes 5,
Mhm.
6, and 7 or whatever. And Blackthorn doesn't really do anything during that time. He just kind of complains.
Yeah.
But I really liked. I think the finale did like a lot of heavy lifting for
Mhm.
me, which, you know, if I'm being totally fair, is still a frustrating aspect of any season of television, because it's like if you're relying on the last episode to do all of the delivering, then, you know, why am I sitting through multiple hours of this? You know, why couldn't you have
Right.
cut this down? But at the same time, I did really enjoy Mariko's arc, and I
Mhm.
think she's kind of the she's like the soul of the
Mhm.
show, and her whole kind of relationship with death and and life,
Mhm.
and kind of her traumatic past and how she
Yes.
kind of owns it, I guess, or kind of embraces the consequences of it, was a really interesting thing. And I think that helped me not feel as frustrated by the kind of stagnation of Blackthorn throughout the middle of it. I think my biggest kind of frustration with any of the main characters was that it felt like for the vast majority of the show, Toranaga wasn't really given anything character-wise. He wasn't
Yeah.
he wasn't like given much personality other than being like the stoic leader.
Mhm.
And he wasn't doing a whole lot because, and you know, I won't get into it until we're in spoilers, but like it's kind of because his whole plan the whole time rests on this idea of sort of sitting back and letting your enemies think blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So it's intentional that he's not doing anything, but that's not an especially compelling thing to watch.
It really, and especially
and again,
Mhm.
well, sorry.
No. Go ahead.
Well, and again, just like with Blackthorn, I felt like the episode really delivers where it needs to, and it made me not feel as frustrated about it. But then when I do think back to the experience of watching those middle episodes, I still remember being like, God, when is this going to fucking go somewhere?
Yeah.
And I love where it goes in the final episode, but it's kind of that push and pull of like, well, did we need all those episodes to get there?
Yes. Like that's my one of my frustrations with the ending itself and the finale is that it's not even, and that's where I'm conflicted with it, is that I want to say that it doesn't pay off on what's promised beforehand, but also what I think was promised beforehand is I don't know how much of what was promised is what I was perceiving as being promised, like, and what I wanted to happen, what I wanted it all to lead to.
Marketing too.
And marketing,
I
sure.
think I felt like the marketing leaned heavier on the warfare aspect of it, which is like barely in this. There's almost no combat.
Yeah. But when what
little violence there is more like execution style violence, not battle violence.
Yes. But when they do swing for those big battle things, whether it's like the cannon fire thing, which is so bloody and awesome,
brutal,
and some very choice sequences involving some people killing people with, swords and other implements.
Right.
It's very well done, very well choreographed, very well realized. It just is a little few and far between. But to go back to Toranaga as a character and that kind of ever-present stoicism that he has throughout the entire miniseries, like, I'm on board with that and on board with him being this like political maneuvering person. Because like even in the first episode, there's the whole thing that's even talked about in the marketing, how like a man has 3 hearts, the one that he puts out to everyone, the one that only he knows, and the one that no one knows, or something like that. That's kind of like a thesis statement for Toranaga as a character. And I'm on board with that. And I'm on board with the stoicism, especially since Hiroyuki Sanada is he's such a badass. He's so great. But when the show does things that would conventionally give that character a big push in the narrative face of things, like he does become more prominent for like a bit after some very significant things happen. But then it's just still like rescinding back into the background and not really, just kind of being the figurehead of the drama. And it just feels like they didn't really capitalize enough on the big dramatic turns that he faced throughout the story.
Yeah, I think that was something that I guess that's a good way to articulate kind of my frustration, is it feels like so much of the show is just kind of relying on characters kind of telling you that he's a calculating genius, and B, Sanada's performance to just kind of convey, this guy knows what's going on.
Yeah.
But we don't really get to see him stringing out these brilliant strategies kind of until that final episode. And it's like, it's not that the reveal is poor. I think the reveal is really cool. I actually think like the way the last episode handles that is really good, and again kind of saves the show for me. But yeah, it's like there are so many, it's almost like a cycle. Almost every episode there's like a catastrophe that happens that would be like a major setback for Toranaga's clan and that sort of thing, and Toranaga's reaction is to just kind of like steel himself, and people around him are like, what are we gonna do? And he's just kind of like, the bird will fly and the sun will set, and we are gonna be okay. And it's like, okay, but like, what action are we taking here?
Can we get a little bit more detail on this, buddy, please?
Yeah. And it's kind of,
that's where John Blackthorne has his famed, like, bruh, you're capping me right now. Like, this is
right.
No cap. You need to get off your high horse.
In that scene, I felt for the first time in the show, I could understand what the characters were saying.
Oh, yeah.
It was when John Blackthorne started screaming about Skibbity Toilet that I finally understood what was happening.
I love it.
But yes, big agree on the kind of, I don't know if it's wasted potential, but kind of like dragging of heels on Toranaga's characterization.
Yeah, and I don't know if I mean, I guess it is a little bit, informed by like what they're going for in terms of just showcasing the kind of how to phrase it, the differences between like the West and East, and like the like John Blackthorne's understanding of Japanese culture, and how he's like the way that that he is coming up against all of these different obstacles, like in terms of just not understanding like what the Japanese people like take into account in terms of like honor and discipline and obedience to like their lord and everything. And like, I guess that does kind of inform the characterization of Toranaga as a stoic person who's keeping all the cards to his chest or whatever. But it just felt, I think you kind of said this, like it didn't feel as compelling as it should have for me. In parts. Yeah.
And I think also the show kind of, there are a lot of other secondary characters in play who have a significant role to play in like the plot, the technical series of events, but aren't necessarily like, we don't really need to know about where they're at emotionally, and we don't really get to know where they're at emotionally. And so it's like when your main character or characters feel like they're not getting enough, then it's like it starts to feel like a waste of time to follow a bunch of other characters that we know aren't, like Ishido, who's I guess the kind of the villain, the main antagonist. Like I enjoy the kind of subterfuge interplay of like him trying to put Toranaga in checkmate, and Toranaga keeps kind of wiling his way out of it. But I didn't really care about Ishido's motive or the bad things that befell him. Like I never really felt compelled by him as a character, as an arc, or Lady Ochiba, who's kind of another power figure that he kind of ropes into his plan. A lot of that just didn't really grab me. So whenever we were cutting to that, I was kind of like, okay, when are we going to get back to the good guys?
Oh, absolutely. And like, I think that I think in the text, like in the actual show, there is enough there to kind of latch on to Ishido, but I don't think the show does quite as good a job juggling like that character arc with other character arcs. Like there's whole things with that work with Blackthorne and Mariko. And like, there's a lot of really interesting stuff there that becomes more prominent as the show progresses, and that's paid off well and done well. But it's kind of at the expense of some other aspects, like Ishido and I can't remember her name. You just said the name.
Oh, Lady Ochiba.
There you go. Yeah, Lady Ochiba. And I just feel like the juggling act wasn't performed quite as well in terms of the narrative for me.
Yeah. I will say I liked the character, like one secondary character I really enjoyed was Yabushige.
Oh, yeah.
He was played by Tadanobu Asano. And he's kind of like the weasel underneath Toranaga's authority. He's kind of like, he's disloyal. He's kind of the snake in the grass who will go with whoever's going to like get him more power, but he's charming in a way. Like it kind of, he's very charismatic, and I liked that he kind of, it's not exactly a redemption arc. In fact, it's kind of like a damnation arc, but but as he kind of descends further into his own selfishness and becomes more, or makes more mistakes, I also found myself kind of like enjoying him, like rooting for him more to like figure out a way out of it, or figure out a way back to where he's on good terms with people. And also his kind of rivalry back and forth relationship with Blackthorn was fun.
Totally agree. I would say maybe my favorite like secondary or supplemental character. Or I think his arc overall was more satisfying to me than really most others, to be honest. I was more interested in his arc, especially late in the show, and how it tied together. I think was really well done, but is another example of I kind of wish it was more prominent.
Sure.
Because at least the show kind of paints everything as like Ishido as being the main bad guy or the main source of conflict. And then toward the end, we get more drama involving Yabushige. And I don't know. I just think that it would have been better if that was, I don't know. I just the juggling act of these different narrative threads was not to my liking.
Sure. Yeah, it's in this weird kind of space where it's not. I've seen a lot of comparisons to Game of Thrones, which I think is both. It's kind of a disservice to both shows, both Shogun and Game of Thrones, and kind of a misunderstanding of what Shogun's going for. But I think something that Game of Thrones does a lot better, and of course it has way more runtime to do this, is balancing, like, making all of the different powerful figures around the realm kind of compelling in their own way and having their own motive. And this show is way more focused on Toranaga and his cohorts, and yet it doesn't really explore Toranaga anyway, at least kind of until the end. And it doesn't give his adversaries the same level of intrigue that like you would get in a Game of Thrones, where kind of like every player on the battlefield is equally compelling for different reasons. And I have plenty of issues with Game of Thrones even before the final season, but that's something that show did really well, that this show doesn't really do well and isn't really trying to do, but also doesn't really come up with like a super compelling alternative to that kind of multifaceted story.
And I think the show kind of sets itself up for that comparison. And I mean, I'm sure this is source material stuff and everything, but just the premise alone of it being like, the shogun or the emperor has passed away, and his heir is, needs to come of age. So there's a council of regents that are kind of taking care of everything, and there's infight like that's setting itself up to be like, oh, well, different factions in a world that I don't understand as a white man in America in 2024. Like, this is Game of Thrones, right?
Well, and it's like on a literal level, this is a Game of Thrones, like it's a gaming of Thrones, I get it, but it's also just kind of like they're telling two different stories. And I think ultimately the what this show is actually trying to do, rather than be that kind of grand political, epic, is, at least for me, the way I experienced it was a lot more about that aspect of clashing cultures and being a stranger in a strange land, like Blackthorn's arc, and also that kind of, I feel like Toranaga's arc and Mariko's arc plays into Blackthorn's arc of like coming to understand the culture in the end. He's very resistant to it the whole time, and it's not really like a racism obliterated story, like a we solved racism type of thing, but it is kind of, Blackthorn does have this arc of he's constantly trying to get out of Japan. Eventually, over time, he kind of learns to adapt to the ways of Japan and embrace certain aspects of the culture and the protocols and that sort of thing, and it feels like his, without spoiling anything, kind of his resolution is kind of syncing up with the audience's resolution of understanding Toranaga and Mariko and those characters. And I really loved that aspect about it. I've been kind of leaning more on the negatives, but I did really like the show overall.
Nice. Well, we'll talk more about that in spoilers, because I do have some things to get off my chest, and I definitely want to pick your brain about, especially the finale. So, I don't rate miniseries on Letterboxd because I just want my stats to be clean for movie watching. But if I were to rate this out of 5 stars, I would rate it probably 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is. It's a very, very good show. I kind of wanted more out of it. And I think that my affection for it will probably grow, and I could see myself revisiting it because it just looks so damn gorgeous. So yeah, that's where I'm landing on it. How about you? Out of 5 stars?
I did log it on Letterboxd because I'm a filthy casual. And I subscribe to the if it's on Letterboxd it counts philosophy.
That's fair. And just like to be clear, I'm
not coming for you.
No. I'm just because I am so neurotic, and I have with the podcast and the year in review episodes, we do stats of movies watched and everything. And I know that Letterboxd has said we're going to do TV stuff later in the year, and I'm I'm very eager to see what that looks like, because I want my stats to be clean, and if I can incorporate TV stats into that, it'd be great.
Separate, that would be cool. Because honestly, I agree. I mean, I know I just said I'm somebody who kind of logs everything on Letterboxd, but if and when they do go full tilt into including TV, because right now they're kind of wishy-washy about whether or not some shows are on there, and they say their rule is if it's only one season, then we'll put it on there. But that's not exactly true. There's a lot of anime on there that's technically multiple seasons, but they have it on there as all one thing. It's what are we counting here? Loki is still on there, even though that's had 2 seasons.
Jeez.
Anyway, so I do think when they go full tilt into including television, I would kind of prefer that there's a way to distinguish it. Same. I don't know that they need to be 2 separate libraries, but in terms of stats, if you could filter them, that would be perfect. That would be ideal. Yeah. But what did you end up rating this? To answer your question, I rated it 4 stars out of 5, which it kind of ends up being a quintessential 4 for me, which is basically I really loved what we got. I would have, if I wanted to really adore this show, I would have wanted it to give me more of the things that I loved. Because, like I said, there's a good stretch of this show where I wasn't really getting a lot out of it. The end kind of sells it for me, but it was kind of if you could have made better use of that real estate in the middle, then maybe we could talk about a 4.5 or something. Nice. Well, I can respect that for sure. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Well, we are going to go ahead and go into spoilers for Shogun. So check the timestamps in the show notes if you want to skip around and everything. Those show notes are at obsessiveviewer.com/OV426. And to bring us into the spoiler section, I'm going to play a clip from the trailer right now.
There's a saying out here, every man has 3 hearts. One in his mouth for the world to know. Another in his chest, just for his friends. And a secret heart, buried deep, where no one can find it. What kind of man wields power in a land like this? The one with the open, or the one you never see? Will I die here? Likely.
Okay, so spoilers on for Shogun. Once again, it is streaming on Hulu. So let me go ahead and just say what I've been dancing around all episode. And it's interesting. It's interesting. So when I saw that first episode, I did have those like connections to like Game of Thrones, like setting it up as Game of Thrones, and I thought, like, I didn't need like a big political thriller interconnected thing or what have you. What I wanted and what I ultimately want out of life is not a 10 episode miniseries adapting one book, but I want like a sprawling, like multi-season series that takes place at the end of, this is, like, even though I have an admiration for feudal Japan and Japanese cinema, this is going to be not quite like authoritative in terms of my knowledge, but taking place like a sprawling multi-season epic, taking place at the end of the Sengoku period, like before the Edo period, like where this is taking place, during like the decades and decades and decades of civil war in Japan, and like the samurai class and aligning themselves with different clans and fighting. Like, I want something huge like that. So when watching the first episode, I didn't realize that it was a miniseries. So after watching the first episode, I was like, I wonder if this is it. I wonder if this is what, like, is this what my like life has been leading toward? And then I realized, oh, it's a miniseries. That's fine too. That's good. But in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking that this story, this setting, this culture is so rich and is the, I don't want to say playground, but it is the playground. It's the sandbox to which many of my favorite movies, my favorite filmmaker of all time, is like had invested in. And I just want more. That's what I come away from it, is I just want more. So that's, and I think that's where where I'm struggling with this.
Your kind of disappointment in it.
Yeah. Like it's an expectations versus reality thing. And like, am I a little bit disappointed in the show because it isn't the show that I wanted going in? Or am I disappointed because in addition to that, these things didn't work for me? So I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's very much like, I mean, obviously they've said pretty openly, and I mean, the source material is like heavily based on real events and real people. Toranaga is basically a stand-in for Tokugawa, who was basically ended the Sengoku period and brought about this era of peace in Japan. I think maybe my terminology is wrong, but I think he effectively ended feudal Japan, like the way that it was structured.
Yeah, that's my understanding, at least.
And John Blackthorne is based on William Adams, who was a Englishman who went to Japan and became the Hatamoto for Tokugawa. So anyway, it does feel like, okay, that is a story and a period rich for expansive adaptation, chronicling the history of Japan at this time, and like, you know, so much political intrigue and military tactics you could, you know, realize on the screen. But ultimately this show, just like from my understanding of the source material, is basically just kind of like a microcosm of that. It's like, we're going to take that setting to tell a more, you know, I guess cerebral or poetic story about, you know, entering a culture and understanding a culture and keeping your cards close to your chest and that sort of thing. And yeah, I think on some level, I agree with you in the sense that, you know, this show was such a big hit and was so well produced that I feel like it's kind of in pop culture kind of eaten up the slot for what could have been what you're talking about, an expansive multi-season thing. So it's like, now maybe nobody's going to make that, at least for several years, because they just made Shogun, and Shogun's about that, but not really, and super popular and successful. So it's like, if you were really wanting that, that kind of hurts, that it's like, so close, but so far. You know,
and like, you would think that would hurt, because I agree that is the case, but also the Dark Tower came out, and I'll never see an actual Dark Tower adaptation. So I'm well versed in this kind of disappointment. But conversely, someone could see Shogun and see the success of it, and then set out to make an adaptation. Imitators that are just completely shitty and actually have the line of, bro, you're capping me right now. That level of just research.
They bring Cosmo back just for that.
Yes. And not to retread a joke I've already made, but just also like I love the idea of like a post-credit scene where Toranaga is standing like in a field, and then someone comes up and they're like, hey, there's this village over here that needs protecting from bandits, if you know anyone.
Yeah, right.
But yeah. And then Anthony Hopkins pops up as a robot. But anyway, what I got out of it, or what we did end up getting, was ultimately, it was satisfactory to me once I got more on the wavelength of what the show is. And I will say that in addition to what we talked about in non-spoilers with the makeup effects and just the attention to detail, also like in the actual, just the writing of it and everything, like it's so well researched, so well done. Like even little bits and pieces, like the like highlighting the No Theater, which was, from my understanding, it was kind of in the same vein as Kabuki Theater, but for a higher class, for like the samurai class. Famously, Throne of Blood by Kurosawa takes a lot of inspiration from No Theater. But just seeing that just like kind of got me very excited, and because I was like, oh, I heard about this type of theater in a commentary track for Throne of Blood. I know things. But like just examining like a lot of the different cultural discrepancies between Blackthorn's understanding of the world and the world of the Japans was really cool, really well drawn, and the attention to detail was satisfactory to me. I just wish the narrative was a little bit stronger for me.
Sure. I do think I felt like although I made those complaints earlier about kind of the middle of the show not really making great use of the characters and relying too heavily on just kind of wrapping things up at the end, I did really enjoy the kind of the emotional thrust of the film, which kind of centers around Mariko and her like I said, her relationship with death and her kind of yearning to be unshackled from her very difficult and unpleasant life. I thought that stuff all hit really well and was incorporated really nicely into aspects of her character, like being a translator and being a poet. And her poem was really cool, and kind of how she's well known for her poetry, and the other characters are like, kind of reciting lines from her, or are like, you're not that slick, I know she probably wrote that, and things like that. Thought that was really cool, and the way that even across the cultural barrier that stuff spoke to Blackthorn and kind of got through to him. I thought all of that was really cool.
Yeah, I found myself a lot more attached to the kind of romantic subplot between them, a lot more than I expected to, because I kind of felt like one of the strengths, and again, I'm a white man in 2024, one of the strengths of the show that I think is very calculated. And I say this having not seen the original adaptation or reading the original novel, but the original novel is was written in 1970s. And I think they may have talked about this on the podcast in one or two episodes, but the thing that I'm drawn to with this is that it feels like it is a modern adaptation of what could have and possibly was a more kind of conventional Western audience story. And what I mean by that is like, it's, you know, like the original novel, from my understanding, very much brought like Eastern storytelling to Western audiences. And like this particular timeline, this particular time in history became, I mean, granted, you know, a lot of stuff was imported from Japan before, but like, I feel like I've heard that it was very much, this was East meets West, kind of story. And what I appreciate about that is that this seems like it is, I feel like this is purposely not putting an emphasis on Blackthorn the way that I think that even a couple of decades ago it would have, to make it more palatable for audiences.
Yeah, it defies several of the mistakes of something like The Last Samurai. You know, it does manage to emphasize Blackthorn and keep him in the center as a main character and tell a compelling story about a Westerner in Japan without feeling like it's making it all about him or failing the Japanese perspective. It is, I think that's probably one of the brilliant things about the show, is how tailored it is to a Western audience while being incredibly truthful to, you know, the Japanese history of it and the Japanese perspectives in it, like the Japanese characters themselves.
And the customs of the era and everything. Like one of the things I like that I think is maybe a little cheeky, I guess, is just like, it's not, the show isn't about Blackthorn being like, whoa, you guys are crazy. Like, you're so different than me. You're crazy. Instead, it's like, they're like, we're going to talk, like, this barbarian is here. And like, it's just like, I kind of like that kind of flip, I guess.
Well, they both Blackthorn looks at like Japanese customs and the Japanese people and sees kind of savages, and they look at him and see a savage, and it's like both cultures are just kind of rejecting the unfamiliar. And you're, you know, through the narrative, like the plot events, the Japanese characters are kind of forced to develop an admiration for Blackthorn, and through the kind of his character arc, Blackthorn is forced to gain this appreciation for the local culture too. And so it's an interesting trade there without feeling like, a white savior narrative or a overly Western perspective. And does that all while being specifically accessible to Western people, like clearly made for a Western audience.
Absolutely.
Which is an impressive needle to thread to needle to thread.
Yep. I had also seen a very funny tweet at some point that was like, I don't know if it was shared in our group chat or anything, but I saw a tweet where it was something like, watching Shogun without the subtitles so I can learn Japanese like this guy is or whatever, and like 2 episodes later it's like he's learning it a lot faster than I am.
Well, and you mentioned at the start of the episode that this show has an all English dub, and I can't imagine watching this show dubbed. It eliminates so much of the subtext of it. Oh,
totally. And that's the thing, like it's not necessarily an English dub, because here's the thing. When I was rewatching the first episode, when I thought I was going to do a Patreon review of it, on one of my days when I was working from home, I was like, maybe I'll throw it on in the background, but I'm like, wait, I don't speak Japanese. So I threw the dubbed version on in the background, and like, I appreciate 2 things about it that I appreciate is that one is that it's not fully like English dub. Like when when the Japanese characters are talking, I think it's like when they're talking and Blackthorn can't understand them, it's still Japanese language, it's still subtitled.
But when it's just us watching Japanese characters talk to each other, it's English. Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing, and I'm not sure, this could have just been wishful thinking on my part, but I feel, I don't remember. I meant to look into it, but I feel like Hiroyuki Sanada did dubbed his own voice for the English track, which I appreciate because that dude's amazing. But before we get to like the finale and everything, because I do want to get your read on some things and kind of talk through some of my feelings on it. Let's kind of quickly hit on some of the big moments of the series. So, the son's death. God, what was his name?
It's not Omi because that's Yabushige's nephew.
It's a Nagakado. I think. Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah. His death and then Mariko's death a few episodes later. How'd you feel about really Nakakado's whole arc? Because he kind of is this sort of not necessarily petulant child, but he is this eager to grow up kind of guy. Like he's kind of, I don't know if part of that is that because his relationship with his father is at such a distance that he wants to prove himself, but he's not ready to prove himself. And then he ends up just slipping and falling and cracking his head and dying.
His death was almost comedic for me. But yeah, his arc leading up to that, I didn't get a ton out of him. I realized, what you said is basically, as far as I can tell, what the show is going for. Yeah. That he wants to be his father's protege. He doesn't really have the skill or competence, at least yet, to do that, and he's overeager.
He's also easily manipulated.
Yeah, he kind of just winds up being like a thorn in everybody's side. He's not particularly rootable. Or likable or anything like that. And yeah, he just kind of makes things worse in every scenario. He kills all those, like, launches that cannon attack and basically starts the war. And yeah, I wasn't that compelled by him. I guess it's kind of interesting to paint one of your central character's own son as basically a foil to him, because I feel like that's basically all he is he kind of shows how not stupid Toranaga is. But it doesn't really make him a very interesting character. So when he died, I was kind of like, good riddance. Like I was sad on a level just because it was like, oh, here's this young guy so committed to it, so thinks his dad has lost his mind and is gonna go take action, and like, yeah, that there's some poetry there that I kind of appreciated, but the nature of his death is just kind of like, whoopsie.
Yeah.
What a doofus.
Right. I liked that a lot, honestly. Like the method of his, like the way that he died felt like such an interesting foil really to the idea that's present throughout the whole show, is this like the idea of an honorable death and choosing an honorable death and doing like dying for a cause and dying for reasons. And then he's like the antithesis of that, in that he just slips and falls, cracks his head and dies. And like that I found very compelling and interesting. What I didn't really like was that it doesn't really do much for the story. Like afterwards, like, yeah, we get
Toranaga's not terribly affected by it, because it's revealed he has like 12 sons.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I have more sons. And like, I like that he at least had that one scene where he was affected by that, and the other guys, Seppuku.
His like right hand man. Yeah, I can't remember his name. I thought that scene was awesome.
Oh my god, it was intense. Yeah.
Both that scene and kind of the aftermath reveal of like basically he knew that, like, Toranaga knew he had to sell his enemies on the deception, even if it meant, making his friend commit suicide.
Wild. Hiramatsu is the character's name, by the way. But yeah, that was really intense, really well done. And I like that we had the moment where he was at his son's grave and he's like, you bought me time, you and Hiramatsu bought me time. And I'm like, that's cool. That's good. And then, spoiler for our discussion about the finale, I kind of wish we would have seen the fruition of that aside from a flash forward, I guess. I don't know. It just, it was a little frustrating for me. But yeah, also Mariko, I thought that was a good conclusion to that arc. And I think that had more weight behind it than anything else in the show. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, the way that Mariko's death and life kind of lingers over the final episode was really cool to me. Kind of the deliberate use of her absence throughout several scenes in that episode was really cool. I was a little, and this is a pretty minor thing, but I was a little like, about her actual death, because it felt like I was confused as to why the saboteurs, the people going after him, would bomb the room. I
am so glad you said that, because I was kind of in the same
goal
boat
of the mission at all. Like Ishido basically like orders this attack or this kidnapping, and it's like they make clear in the final episode that it was meant to be a kidnapping, and Ishido would know that killing these people would start an all-out war, which is ultimately, what Toranaga wants, but Ishido wouldn't want that. Like he was trying to, stop information from getting out and stop that connection from happening, but it just felt weird that like his men would, we're gonna blow the door open with bombs. Nobody's standing on the other side of this closet door. Felt weird.
Here's my take on it, and this is just something that's formulating in my brain right now, so I don't know how accurate it is, but my kind of interpretation of that is that we have the scene where they're under siege, they go into the room, they're blocked in there, they hear that they're going to use explosives, and I think two things. One is that she thinks that explosion, like they even say, like that explosion is going to kill everyone in there. If they blow open the door, they're going to kill everyone. So she's blocking it so that no one else dies except her.
Right.
The other thing is that she knows that her death will be what kicks off, the war and does this is the thing that needs to happen. So I think it's twofold in that respect. But in the moment, I didn't understand any of it.
Well, I get that from Mariko's perspective. I get why she would, throw herself on the proverbial
why they
grenade.
Would do that.
It didn't make sense to me why Ishido's men would do such a reckless thing. Like, it's not really, we don't, even if we'd gotten maybe just like a scene of them that kind of articulated maybe their incompetence or their recklessness or something, and it would be like, oh, okay, that's the show's answer for it. But like, the fact that they were sent to kidnap them, and I get why Mariko would throw herself on the blade to make the plan happen. I don't understand why they would be using so many explosives to kill enough people, like to kill everybody in the room, when that's not the mission at all.
I agree, and my counter to that is I feel like maybe that's the reason why they said like, hey, we're gonna blow open this door. We're gonna use explosives so that
themselves.
That's my more apologetic view of it. So I don't know, but I think that it carried well. Like the aftermath of that carried well into the finale. Which, let's talk about the finale. I wanted more. I didn't. It wasn't that. all that pleased by it. The visions of a future elderly Blackthorn, I did kind of take a peek at an interview that the showrunners did with Slate.com, which I'll put a link in the show notes, that kind of put it into better context for me. So the interpretation I had, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I thought it was just going to be like a flash forward. But judging from that interview that I read, it's basically saying that this is a potential future for Blackthorn where he goes back to England, and it's a future where he doesn't learn from his experience in Japan. He doesn't give himself over to like the life that he has built for himself there. So in the future, he's an elderly man in England. His grandchildren are like, oh, hey, you know, a savage gave you this sword, didn't he? And he also in that he has the rosary. Whereas in the finale, he, as it's pointed out in that interview that I didn't really notice in the show, or I didn't connect in the show, he throws he drops the rosary in the water. So that's a potential future for him. How'd you feel about that kind of interesting, like 2001: A Space Odyssey sort of vibe for the finale?
I was also like, in the moment, I was also confused by it and just kind of took it at face value. The like, oh, we're just flashing forward. But I did notice him dropping the rosary into the water and kind of like had my moment right then. But it didn't register with me. I don't know if I may have read that same interview or seen some other article about it or something, but the kind of metaphorical level of Blackthorn's vision in the future kind of deteriorating as the episode went on, being an indicator of the fact that future was never going to happen, that didn't register with me. The only thing I picked up on was the he threw the rosary away, so obviously he wouldn't have it in the future, so I guess that was just like a maybe. But I didn't really pick up on that it was like an active ongoing dream that Blackthorn was having, and that dream was fading as his life changed throughout the final episode. So I thought that was cool. I thought it was really cool in retrospect. Once I kind of, read a little bit more about it and was like, oh, that's a really interesting way to do that. It didn't like wow me or whatever, but I did like that better than the idea of just it being a straight flash forward. When it started doing that during the episode, I was kind of like, this feels like it's kind of taken me out of the ending of the quote unquote present day, like the 1600 story. So I was kind of happy that it ended up being an unreality, I guess. So
right.
It was a cool framing device, even if I didn't totally pick up what it was putting down at the moment.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been maybe better served if it was introduced maybe an episode or two earlier, because it feels weird to have it contained.
To add it in. Yeah. And I think also, I mean, the explanation of it being basically a dream, we never really see any scenes well, that's not true. In the finale, there is a scene where he like wakes up from having that vision. I guess that's true. I was going to say, we never really get the connect that it's actually happening in his brain. Yeah.
But I think that's the only time that it does. So it's open to interpretation.
I agree, though. I think a better way of doing it might have been like having one of those flashes every episode, or like starting halfway through the season, then we get one every episode or whatever. It was a little odd to pick it up just at the end, because it doesn't feel like, I mean, we know Blackthorn wants to leave Japan,
right,
and go home, because he says that over and over again, but there's never like an emotional side to it of like what he wants to go home to or what he hopes to do with his life or anything like that. So when it kind of starts those flashes of like, oh, he's a grandfather and he's got little kids running around and stuff, I was like, there was a disconnect because it didn't feel like that was something that was set up or like baked into his character arc. So it was a little clunky. Yeah.
I think it would have been interesting, and this would have maybe veered it more into just like kind of cliched storytelling if they did this, but maybe after he and Mariko hooked up the first time, like have like one of those visions of the future. So like you think like, oh, did they have kids? And then, when she gets all blowed up, it's like, oh, whoa, okay, no, she didn't.
Yeah. That would have been cool. Kind of obfuscate the viewer's understanding of where it's all going, which it is still doing. It's just not really attempting that until the last leg of the journey. And it's like, well, why do it now?
Yeah, exactly. But the resolution or the realization of Toranaga's whole thing is relegated to a conversation that he has with oh god, I can't remember Yabashige as he's about to perform seppuku. That was ultimately disappointing to me. I liked the explanation that like, oh, the Crimson Skies already happened. It was Mariko doing this, and this is what's going to happen now, and this is this and that, and like maybe part of it is just I wanted that big sprawling epic to be realized. I wanted that, like, I was more invested in the idea of like a couple episodes before, they're like, oh, he has to go back to Osaka to face certain death and to be executed and everything. I thought like, oh, then the finale is going to be them marching on Osaka and doing the Crimson Sky thing and taking everything, which is what the show was leading me to think it was going to do, I think. And then ultimately just I didn't connect with what actually occurred in it because I just wanted more, especially because it's Hiroyuki Sanada. I wanted more of him. I wanted more badassery. I wanted more a bigger showcase for his acting abilities that I feel ultimately we didn't get from this.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of feel that in general about the show, that like we didn't get the showcase of Sanada as an actor that I was hoping for. I will say though, I was not really disappointed by the kind of lack of grand epic finale, because I felt like there's I think it's in episode 8 or 9, a conversation between Toranaga and Mariko where he's basically he tells her that his like Hidetoshi or whatever, his like right hand man after he killed himself, he basically reveals to her like all part of the plan. You ready to do your part? And then I was kind of like, I think at that point, and the fact that we were 9 episodes deep in the show and like no real action had happened, I was kind of primed for that sort of subversive anticlimax, I guess. And so I didn't really mind. I was like, I think at this point, if we were going to get a battle, we would get one. And honestly, and I kind of my disappointment in that is probably completely contained to me as a viewer because I mean, frankly, we had all the talk about Crimson Sky being this plan to take, like, basically sack Osaka. And then the penultimate episode is titled Crimson Sky, and it is Mariko's whole thing. Like, them in Osaka.
Like I kind of feel like I should have been satisfied by that. And ultimately I liked that episode. I liked the conclusion of that arc. I liked how all that played out. It just kind of goes back to, I just want a big sprawling feudal Japan epic, multi-season story. So I don't know.
I really liked that the scene with Yabushige at the end. And I think maybe that was just playing on my appreciation of Yabushige's character arc, and it was a nice finale for him, on top of being a cool reveal of Toranaga's plan. I did think, I mean, it is, on paper, it's like the classic cliche kind of lazy Hollywood, like, oh, and I had this planned the whole time.
Yeah.
But it's like, at least for me, it was like the best possible version of that. And maybe that's down to Sanada's performance. Maybe it's down to the way they write the scene. And I like that it's basically Toranaga speaking his secret into the abyss. Like, they're standing on a cliffside. He's literally, he says, I'm telling the future to a dead man. Like, or why tell a dead man the future? That was a really cool aspect to me. And also played into the three hearts thing of like,
absolutely,
it's Toranaga speaking out loud the heart that he will never share with anyone besides this dead man, which was cool. I think on repeat viewings I'll probably gain a new appreciation for it, knowing the full scope of the story. I do think it would be fun to, now that I've seen this version, go back and watch the 1980s version, and then after that read the book, kind of go in reverse and see how I feel about it. But ultimately I did really enjoy this. It scratched many itches that I constantly have with this type of setting, the storyline, this. Maybe you should get that checked out.
I probably should. I probably should.
You get an ointment.
Yes.
Instead of watching TV.
Yes. So. I should. But any other thoughts on Shogun?
That feels pretty complete. I guess I will say the other kind of fold of my experience, which I sort of talked about at the start of the episode, was to kind of touring myself through some like classic.
Oh, we're going to get to that
cinema,
in a bit.
We can get to that. Okay, yeah. I will say as for Shogun, really enjoyed it. Really solid.
Nice. Kind
of agree that, a part of me wishes it was a sprawling historical epic. A little disappointed that that's not what it was, but also really appreciated the thematic things that it was playing at instead.
Yeah. Well said. And ultimately I liked it too. So it was good. Yeah. Let us know what you thought. You can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. But we're going to wind down this episode with a special potpourri section where we're going to talk about samurai movies.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention that was the plan. That was the plan I kept in my inside heart.
Yeah. Your interior.
So, yes. Before we get to that whole section.
Are you about to kill me?
We established at the beginning that you're my second, so you're about to chop my head off. I just need to take...
Yeah, so you're speaking into the abyss before you die. Yeah.
Exactly. But before we get to that special potpourri section, I do want to take a quick moment to remind everyone that if you like the show, please take a moment to follow us on social media and subscribe to and rate the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or whatever your preferred podcast app is. And don't forget to subscribe to the Obsessive Viewer Podcast YouTube channel as well, where I'm posting more and more videos and live streams of podcasts. The episode that you're listening to now will post next week, the video version of it on the YouTube channel. And also, final thing before we get into the potpourri section is that if you're interested in starting your own podcast and you want to start your own podcast, you can go to Libsyn.com, where I host all three of the podcasts. I've done it for 11 years now, and use promo code OBSESS when you sign up for a new account. You'll get up to 2 months free depending on when you sign up, and we'll get a commission on it as well. So more details on that are in the show notes of the episode. Check that out. Again, Libsyn.com. Use the promo code OBSESS. Now back to the show. Andy, let's go into some potpourri. We can do kind of a rapid fire kind of back and forth because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But you have gone through some samurai films and some Japanese films. What's jumped out?
Well, I kind of used Shogun as an excuse to kind of dive headfirst into samurai cinema and jidaigeki and that sort of thing. So I had made myself a list of, like 16 movies I wanted to watch kind of alongside the show as it came out weekly. A couple of them I didn't get to, for just, I was busy. Yeah. But they're still on my long list for Japanese cinema things to watch. But, things I watched, I'll go in order that I watched them.
Sure.
Seven Samurai, Throne of Blood, Hidden Fortress, Yojimbo and Sanjuro, Harakiri, the first Zatoichi film, The Tale of Zatoichi. Sword of Doom, Samurai Rebellion, Lone Wolf and Cub 1 and 2, Goyoken, which was a surprise to me. And then I watched the first half of Kagemusha before my defective Blu-ray crapped out on me, and 13 Samurai.
Okay.
So it was mostly classics, only one modern film. I also had the Twilight Samurai on my list, which was a Hiroyuki Sanada film, which I thought was an appropriate pick since he's the star of the show, but I didn't get to it. So I'll check that out at some point. And the other one I didn't get to was Kurosawa's Ran, which is one of his like lattermost films.
Yes.
One of the last, at least one of the last like samurai films he did.
Yeah. My kind of understanding is I believe Kagemusha was in 1980 and Ran was in 1985. And I think the kind of conventional anecdote is really that Kagemusha was kind of it was one of, if not his first, like, filmed in color films. But it was like people kind of consider it to be kind of a training run for Ran. Having said that, I actually prefer Kagemusha over Ran. I think it's so gorgeous. Like, you got an hour into it or halfway into it?
Yeah, hour 20 or so. Not quite halfway.
Okay. There's one shot that you would have seen then that I think is one of the most beautifully composed shots in all of Kurosawa's filmography that I've seen, and in all of film that I've seen, basically. It's where it's like in the aftermath of a battle. A bunch of people are marching in the background, and you see like a flag or a banner in the foreground, and it's set at like sunset, and it just looks.
Yeah, it's a really cool shot.
It's so beautiful, man.
Yeah. Honestly, also that the like a really great just get you into it. The first shot of the film, which is the Lord or whatever, the Shogun or whatever, and his and the decoy character just in a big wide of them just sitting there. That was a really cool shot and like hooked me right from the get-go. So I'm definitely gonna return to finish that one because I was captivated by it before my Blu-ray froze up.
Yeah, that's such a bummer, man.
Yeah. But it was, I mean, all told, like my whole journey was very fun. Certainly just the beginning of my journey, but it was cool to see so many Mifune appearances.
Oh my God, legend. Just a legend. And that's one of the things that I mentioned to you when you showed me the list when you first started out on it was like the first two that you watched were Seven Samurai and Throne of Blood, which are not only my two favorite Kurosawa movies, not only my two favorite Japanese movies, but two of my all-time favorite movies, one of which being my all-time favorite movie, Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to find where did you rate Seven Samurai?
Maybe I forgot to. I may have.
Very suspicious.
I will go log that one. But no, I mean, Seven Samurai is one of those. I may not have logged it because I remember thinking this is one of those 5-star movies that I just don't have much to say about.
Sure.
Because like it's perfect and everybody knows it's perfect and everybody's already said way more than I could ever say about it. So then I probably just spaced log.
Plus, the definitive statement about it is obviously Zack Snyder's 2 Rebel Moon movies.
And I had already run my mouth about that. So
yes.
Again, not much more to be said about that one, but it was a really cool place to start because I was like, and I think that was the earliest movie, like
in terms of release,
in terms of history, that I watched, and so I was like, wow, what a starting point.
Oh yeah. So Criterion Channel has recently started, like within the last like month or so. They have like a Criterion 24/7. So it's like a channel that just constantly streams movie after movie after movie, on Criterion Channel. And one morning, our friend Brent messaged me and was like, "Hey, look what's on it." And it was like Seven Samurai had started like 20 minutes before that. So I was like, I'm going to throw it on. And so I threw it on, and like, it was also a day, this is a tangent, but it was also a day where, I was like, I need to run errands. And then like I tweeted this and like I tagged Criterion Channel because I'm a loser, but I was like, I really like Criterion Channel doing Criterion 24/7 because now I can have it playing in the background when I run errands so that my cat can get a proper film education. But that day she did see Seven Samurai, which she's seen Seven Samurai before, obviously, but
sure.
But that's obviously my favorite movie. I could talk about it forever, but just like when it gets to the action at the end of the movie, like the final, like when the rain starts falling, which weather in Kurosawa movies means shit's about to go down. And like, it's like, it's very, like everyone's talked about it. Like it is famous and everything, obviously, but like that freaking hero shot of Kanbei with the bow and arrow. And it's just, like, he's taking down bandits. It's just like, I just fucking love this movie.
It's so, and this is not, to be disrespectful to any of the other movies I watched, but it's so insanely ahead of its time, even in comparison to his other movies, like movies he makes after this, movies that I like. A lot of these movies are fucking awesome, but like it's crazy how dialed in that one is, especially for its time, and how just
absolutely
sweeping and epic it is, in ways that a lot of movies of that era were just like limited by technical aspects and by just conventions of how filmmaking was done at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, like the Yojimbo and Sanjuro movies, really cool. I really enjoyed them, but they don't feel as, I don't know, weirdly enough, as advanced as Seven Samurai is.
Oh yeah.
Which was such an interesting thing. I mean, Hidden Fortress gets the benefit of like it was I think it's its first widescreen film, which just gives it such a canvas to work with, which is really cool to see. But I think until I got to Harakiri, which blew me away.
Oh yeah.
Seven Samurai kind of it kind of set me up for like just minor disappointment for like a few movies.
Yeah.
I enjoyed every movie I watched on this list.
And that's so great to hear. I was going to say, since I couldn't see the rating for Seven Samurai, I was kind of concerned that like maybe there was an issue with your Letterboxd. Yeah, well, I didn't know if there was an issue with your Letterboxd, because like I also saw like Throne of Blood, like you're missing like 1.5 stars. Right. No, I did want to pick your brain to see what you thought of Throne of Blood, because it's such, those two movies are my two favorite of Kurosawa's, obviously, but I just think that Throne of Blood as a Shakespeare adaptation, and just like it's so damn good. What did you think of it?
Yeah, Throne of Blood is one that like I could very easily see growing on me with further revisitation. I really enjoyed it. I thought Mifune was maybe as captivating as any other film I've seen him in. He's just like nuts in this movie. Oh yeah. Just so wild-eyed and crazy. I found it a little bit tedious. I'm not gonna lie, like kind of like the middle portion of it. I thought the ending was really cool. I thought the way it handled the like the witches or like the spirit was fucking rad.
Oh my, it's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Yeah.
And of course the kind of like when shit hits the fan at the end, I really like that. I really, came around for that. So that's one I will definitely revisit in the future.
Nice.
Because I like the story of Macbeth and I like seeing different versions of it. And I thought Kurosawa's was very much it's incredibly faithful to the story, but it's also singular in how Kurosawa interprets it.
Yeah, I remember when I was like a sophomore in high school, I bought the Criterion DVD, and like I would take like the insert, the booklet from it in like to school with me to read like during a free period or something. And then I remember getting like so much excitement when like in English class, like we read Macbeth and I was like, oh my God, this is like Throne of Blood. Yeah. This guy ripped off Kurosawa.
Throne of Blood into a play.
Exactly. But I do also want to pick your brain. I could talk about all these movies for forever, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But I do want to ask you two things about two specific movies. One is one that I haven't seen in a little bit. I think I saw it. I rewatched it a couple of years ago. But Samurai Rebellion. I watched it in 2020. And Harakiri, which you mentioned before. How'd you feel about these movies, and how much were you blown away by Harakiri? Because goddamn, that movie's amazing.
Yeah, Harakiri's incredible. Like, of movies I've seen in the last 6 months or a year, like easily at the top. Like, it just blew me away. Tatsuya Nakadai, the lead actor, who I got to see more of as I went further down the list. He's just incredible in it. Like, every time, his character has like the cards up his sleeve kind of the whole time, and like just every time he's about to school these arrogant governors, he just starts laughing in that deep voice. I'm like, oh man, this guy's a badass.
Yep.
And also I just love, maybe it's kind of growing up in like with very traditional values and kind of a traditional home. I just love stories that are kind of about really reckoning with like the flaws of tradition, the things that go overlooked in like traditions of culture and like old like classic mores and stuff. And I just love that it's like a big kind of middle finger or calling out of like the things that were valued in that culture at that time, and kind of the silliness of the like obsession with honor and
in the hypocrisy of it.
Yeah, the hypocrisy. And then of course, like, if that wasn't enough, if it wasn't just a really cool emotional drama, it ends in this really badass like showdown.
Yes.
It's just like, I was not expecting from that movie, as kind of slow and cerebral and methodical as it was, to then explode into this, big showdown that was like fit for, Zatoichi or Lone Wolf and Cub.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. We get this too.
Oh yeah.
So that movie's incredible. I want to own that one now.
Yeah, it's definitely good. And then finally, Samurai Rebellion. I remember being really kind of taken with the sense of duty and honor that is kind of explored in that. But again, I haven't seen it for like 3.5 years. But another Toshiro Mifune performance there. Yeah,
well, in that one, it felt like, I watched several Mifune movies, again, liked them all, but never really felt like I connected with one of his characters like I did in Samurai Rebellion. He's a really, kind of like Harakiri, it's a really interesting sort of challenge of how that era is depicted, because his character is this yes, he's a brilliant sword fighter and he does adhere to a lot of the cultural traditions, but at the end of the day, he's a dad who loves his son and has his heart like reignited by his son's love.
Mm-hmm.
And then, kind of uses that as fuel against the corrupt system that surrounds him. And so that was a really beautiful, and again, kind of gets to have its cake and eat it too, like Harakiri, where it has some pretty cool sword play there at the end.
Yep.
And I that one also has Tatsuya Nakadai in it.
It does, doesn't it?
And I like seeing them together on the screen playing rivals. That was cool.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't want to take up more of your time, and also I've got to go to the bathroom like you wouldn't believe. So we can wind down this episode.
Sure.
So that's it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you, Andy, for your time. I appreciate it, and I am trying to find what I'm doing next week on the show, but I am failing to find that. It's kind of up in the air because I am at a point where, like, on the list I have for next week, The Fall Guy, and then the secondary review being Unfrosted.
Oh yeah.
But there's like 2 or 3. There's multiple movies in the theaters that I could see and review. So it's up in the air, but we'll see. We'll be back next week for that. But once again, before we go, Andy, could you tell people where they can find you online and where they can find Odd Trilogies and anything else?
Yeah. Probably the best place to find me individually would be Instagram and Twitter or X or whatever at Not So Handy Andy. You can find Odd Trilogies on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Odd Trilogies, and on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts and Castos and all that. Next thing up around the corner is Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Parts 1 and 2. Don't know that we will get around to covering the director's cut, the contractually obligated director's
Jesus
cut.
Christ.
You can bet your ass we did the PG-13 Netflix cut.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to listening to that and never watching the second movie. I might eventually, but who knows? But
yeah.
Well, thank you again, Andy. Very much pleasure to chat with you again, and I look forward to having you on again in the future at some point.
Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to chopping your head off.
Nice. We've got that clipped. Perfect. All right. Well, once again, that's it for this week's episode of The Obsessive Viewer. As always, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to follow the show on social media and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Also, check out Obsessive Viewer Podcast's other shows, Tower Junkies, a Stephen King podcast hosted by Tiny and myself, and Anthology, the Twilight Zone and Classic Sci-Fi podcast hosted by me that just launched, that just came back. I am now on season 4 of the Twilight Zone, and I'm so excited. So check that out. Once again, thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next week. And now, enjoy this short clip from a recent Patreon-exclusive episode. For the full episode and more Patreon-exclusive content, sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. What I really appreciate about it is that even, like, at least in the first part of the story, they're fighting. They're arguing over whether it was real, whether it was not real, what was real, what's not real, what is the nature of their trauma. That is what they're kind of getting at, and that's what they're working through in the first part of the movie. And I really like that as a way to just kind of break open the tension of the familial bond that they have, or the familial bond that has been severed by this event in their past, their familial childhood trauma experience. And I really, really like that. I think that is such a good way to bring us into both of these characters' positions. We've got Karen Gillan playing Kaylee, and we've got Brenton Thwaites playing Tim. And we have this kind of clashing of perspectives on what happened and what the truth is of what happened. And we've got Tim, who has been institutionalized for the last 10 years, or 11 years, and he has basically been cured of his trauma to an extent. He's been cured, and his position is that, you know, this isn't what, like, it's not necessarily so much a, like, I'm not going to entertain this supernatural thing. It's more of a, you're not remembering it the right way. You're not remembering it the correct way. And I find that to be so interesting, and it's dealt with so quickly and so cleanly. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our episodes, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on this show, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, visit obsessiveviewer.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and grow our community. If you want to support the show and get early access to new episodes, as well as a steady stream of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For information on more podcasts presented by obsessiveviewer.com, visit obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn. Check out the show notes for your promo code to get started podcasting today.